What do Nike sneakers, the Olympic rings, athlete sponsorship deals, and even the technology inside a tennis racket all have in common? They're not just part of sport, they're intellectual property. And in many cases, they're worth far more than the game itself. Welcome back to Elise Explains IP, the podcast where we make intellectual property practical, strategic, and actually relevant to your business. Today's episode is a special one because it's World Intellectual Property Day. And this year's theme is IP and sports. Ready, set, innovate. Now, even if you don't run a sports business, this topic matters more than you might think. Because sport is one of the clearest, most visible examples of how IP drives value, revenue, and long-term brand power. And there are some very real lessons here for any business building a brand, creating products, or working with partnerships. When most people think about sport, they think about performance. They think about athletes, teams, competition, achievement. But behind the scenes, sport is powered by intellectual property. Let's break that down. Trademarks protect team names, logos, and events. Think about AFL clubs, the Olympics, the FIFA World Cup. Copyright protects broadcasts, footage, and media content. Design rights and patents protect equipment and innovation, and even the team jersey. Everything from running shoe technology to swimwear is covered. Brand and reputation, which isn't a registered right, but is often the most valuable asset of all. Sport is essentially a commercial ecosystem built on IP assets. The game might be what people watch, but IP is what the people pay for. So let's take a step back. Why is sport so commercially powerful? Because it creates emotional connection at scale. Fans don't just watch, they identify. And that's where IP becomes incredibly valuable. Think about the opportunities, your merchandise, sponsorship deals, licensing arrangements, media rights. None of that works without clear ownership of intellectual property. For example, if a team didn't control its name or logo, it couldn't license merchandise. If an event didn't control its brand, sponsors wouldn't pay to be associated with it. If broadcasters didn't have copyright, there would be no media rights deals and no money for television rights. Now, here's where this becomes relevant beyond sport, because the same issues show up in everyday businesses. Let's take a common scenario, one we've discussed on this podcast before. A startup builds a strong brand. They invest in marketing, social media, maybe even some influencer partnerships, but they haven't registered their trademark, documented ownership properly, or controlled how their brand is used. Now imagine that a third party starts using a similar name. An influencer misuses the brand, or a manufacturer claims rights over parts of their product. At that point, the business is exposed. And this is exactly what sporting organisations work very hard to avoid. They are extremely disciplined about IP ownership and control. The Innovate part of this year's theme is particularly interesting because sport is a major driver of technological innovation. Things like performance tracking technology, wearables and data analytics, advanced materials and equipment, and broadcasting technology and streaming have all been developed through sport. These innovations are often protected through patents, confidential information, and software licensing. And importantly, they are commercialized. Innovation in sport isn't just about winning, it's about creating new revenue streams. Another fascinating layer in this theme is the role of the athletes themselves. Because athletes are not just individuals, they are also brands. Their name, their image, their reputation all form part of the commercial IP ecosystem. And this is where we see sponsorship deals, endorsements, personal branding, and the licensing of image rights. And this area can get complex very quickly. Who owns what? What rights have been licensed? What happens if there's a dispute? Even things like photos of an athlete are in question because do they belong to the photographer or the athlete whose image it is of? For business owners, the parallel is clear. If your business is tied closely to a founder or personality, you need to think carefully about the ownership of the brand assets, the separation between the personal and the business intellectual property, and the long-term scalability of the business. One of the most well-known IP issues in sport is ambush marketing. This is where a business tries to associate itself with an event, like the Olympics, but without actually being an official sponsor. For example, a company runs advertising during the Olympics, suggesting a connection, but without their permission. Event organisers take this very seriously, because sponsorship rights are only valuable if they are exclusive and enforceable. This is why major events register extensive trademarks, control the language and the branding, and actively monitor the misuse and the off-license use. Again, the lesson is simple. If you don't actively protect your IP, you dilute its value. So, what are some practical takeaways? Here are a few key lessons. Number 1, treat your IP as a core business asset, not an afterthought. 2, register what matters early. Trademarks in particular are critical. Also, patents and designs need to be registered before launching and being made public. 3, control how your brand is used, especially in relation to partners, collaborators, and influencers. 4, think about commercialization. IP isn't just for protection, it's also a revenue stream. And 5, plan for scale. Ownership structures matter as your business grows. A reality check. If your brand disappeared tomorrow, could someone else legally use it? Could you stop them? Could you prove ownership? If the answer is unclear, that's your starting point. Sport gives us a very clear lens on how valuable intellectual property really is. It's visible, commercial, and fiercely protected. But the same principles apply whether you're running a global sporting organisation or building a growing business. Because at the end of the day, intellectual property is about one thing: owning what you've built. If you're not sure whether your business is properly protected, or you're starting to scale and want to get this right early, that's exactly the work that I help clients with. You can book a strategy call with me via my website, elisesteegstra.com. And as always, if you found this helpful, share it with someone who's building something worth protecting. Thanks for listening to Elise Explains IP, and happy World Intellectual Property Day. Thanks for spending time with me on Elise Explains IP. If you picked up something useful, hit follow, subscribe, leave us a review, or send it to a founder friend who could use this information. And remember, this is general information, not legal advice. If you do want help with your IP, you can book a strategy call with me at any time via my website. The link's in the description. So until next time, own your own ideas.